for the economy as a whole. So there's two competing factors. One is how fast our global economy is growing, and the other is how high is the price of the product. And those two factors can point in different directions at times, and then they can point in the same direction at other times. Over the last week or so, they seem to be pointing in the same direction, which tended to underpin lower prices.
We would like your calls and your questions by email, journal@cspan.org, or you can tweet us at cspanwj on Twitter. We welcome your participation in this. And we do have a tweet from Jody Tom asking, are you going to take questions about energy or gas at the pump? Talking about gas just doesn't address our problems. But in fact, your statistics cover a wide berth of the energy equation. So just widening the conversation, can you tell our audience about alternative fuel use as a percentage of energy consumption in the United States? How are we trending?
Yes. So trending upward, so renewable fuels overall, including both fuels for transportation fuels like ethanol, as well as including renewable fuels for electricity like wind power, solar, geothermal, etc. Those are one of the fastest growing parts of the U.S. energy system. Now, they are starting from a relatively small base. Currently, our overall energy system, over 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. And so another part of that is nuclear power, and then around 9% or so is renewables, including both things like biofuels for transportation as well as renewable electricity sources. But we do expect that to increase over time. One of the increases, since we're focused here on gasoline, is ethanol. Now, ethanol has increased very significantly over the last several years, and it's currently up to about 10% of our gasoline consumption. So it's blended 10% ethanol into about 90% gasoline. And so when you go to buy regular gasoline now, it's typically mixed about 10% with ethanol. This has been driven by a number of different factors. Key factors that have driven this increase, one is that there's a tax credit for ethanol, which encourages ethanol production. Second is that we now have a renewable fuel standard for ethanol and other biofuels, which is slated to increase the amount of biofuels over the next decade or more, up to a very significant increase over that period of time. And then the third factor underpinning increased interest in biofuels is higher prices of oil, which make alternative sources of fuel relatively more competitive.
U.S. Department of Agriculture has a role in this biofuels equation too, and just wanted to point out a column in the Washington Times, Commodity Pullback and Opportunity. Chris Versassi is writing, also this week the U.S. Department of Agriculture released its May World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, which called for U.S. corn production to reach 13.5 billion bushels in 2011. Such a level would make it the largest U.S. crop ever, outdoing the record 13.1 billion bushel corn crop in 2009. Despite the favorable headlines associated with that production forecast and the ensuing price fall in corn and other commodities, deeper in USDA's forecast, we find that despite the record production forecast, corn stocks will remain in very tight supply. So you work with the Agriculture Department because ethanol is a part of the energy equation? I mean, how do you share statistics on that?
Yes. We actually tend to collect our own statistics on ethanol. In fact, one of the things that we've been doing over the last several years due to the significant increase in ethanol use is that we've had to change our statistical collections to better incorporate ethanol into our balances of petroleum product supply. We, of course, do communicate with the Department of Agriculture on, one of the things that there's actually an interagency group now on the statistical side is to improve coordination of agricultural statistics and energy statistics.
This vote, the ayes are 180.
But we collect our own data on biofuel use within the energy system.
Beginning with Lewisburg, Ohio. Jean, Independent, you're on the line.
Hi, I have a basic question just about the oil companies in general. How is it that they come to own all the oil? I mean, there's no American oil that's part of the commons. It's all in the hands of Shell and Exxon and these private-owned companies. How did they get the oil? Did they just purchase the land outright and get the mineral rights with that too? And was there any taxpayer money involved in subsidizing the purchase of that land? Also, I'd like to know, are these really American companies? Do they have any obligation to act in the interest of the American people?
On this vote, the ayes are 182, the nays are 228, with one recorded as present. The motion is not adopted. Question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Gentleman from Maryland, for what purpose do you rise?
As for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
So with that motion to recommit failing in the House, votes now on final passage of the Intelligence Programs Bill. This is a 5-minute vote, and this will wrap up legislative work for the week here in the House. After special order speeches, members will begin a week-long break to return to their districts for work. The Associated Press reporting today, Wisconsin Democratic Senator Herb Kohl will announce he is not running for re-election in 2012. Two Democratic sources with knowledge of his plan say he'll make the announcement later today in Milwaukee. It is a blow to Democrats, who will now have to defend another open seat against Republicans in a swing state. Senator Kohl is also the owner of the NBA Milwaukee Bucks, and he is the 5th Democratic senator to announce his retirement ahead of the 2012 election. This also from the AP. The State Department says its annual worldwide lottery for U.S. immigration visas was corrupted by a computer glitch, and the results will have to be scrapped. It's a disappointment to tens of thousands of would-be immigrants who were notified this year that they had won a chance to come and live legally in the U.S.
On this vote, the ayes are 392, the nays are 15. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. To what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that in the engrossment of Bill H.R. 754, the clerk be authorized to make such technical and conforming changes as necessary to reflect the actions of the House.
And so ordered. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, due to a clerical error, I ask unanimous consent that the following co-sponsors be removed from the permanent record as co-sponsors of H.R. 435, Representative Regal, Representative Adams, and Walden.
Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise?
Chairman, I was unavoidably detained on May 9th in my state of Texas dealing with issues on immigration reform with the President of the United States, and I missed the following roll call votes. And if I had been present at that time, I would have voted roll call vote 299, no, roll call vote 300, no, and roll call vote 301, no. In addition, yesterday, because of another meeting with the President, I missed roll call vote 321, H-Con-Res 50, I would have voted no, and roll call vote 322, the rule for the intelligence authorization, I would have voted aye. I ask unanimous consent that it be placed in the appropriate place in the record.
Without objection, the gentlelady's statement will appear in the record.
Thank you.
Am I done?
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose the gentleman from New York
for
rise?
unanimous consent, I want to indicate that I missed the last vote inadvertently, that had I been here, I would have voted in the affirmative.
Without objection, the gentleman's statement will appear in the record.
Thank you.
The House will be in order. The Chair is prepared to entertain one-minute requests. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to speak on my amendment that was offered earlier today by my colleague Mr. Reid on my behalf and was included in the Intelligence Authorization Act. My amendment honors the brave members of the intelligence community, military, and civilian contingent who played a vital role in the mission that killed Osama bin Laden on May 1st. On September 11, 2001, bin Laden and members of his terrorist network struck at the heart of the nation, carrying out attacks that took the lives of nearly 3,000 innocent Americans. Of those killed, 2,752 were in my hometown of New York City, including over 400 police officers, firefighters, and first responders. The largest percentage of these Americans and their families called my district of Staten Island and Brooklyn home. So I have a good reason to stand here today and to congratulate the men and women of our intelligence community for their role, the role that they played in locating and killing Osama bin Laden, a man who was the embodiment of evil and oppression. The members of America's intelligence community are faceless warriors whose heroic accomplishments rarely see the light of day. So I urge this administration, Mr. President, please, these men deserve our underlying gratitude for their role in this extraordinary mission, and they deserve our praise, not our prosecution.
The gentleman's time has expired. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the Chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to honor the members of the intelligence community for their role in the mission that killed Osama bin Laden on May 1st, 2011. I, too, am from New York, and unfortunately many of my constituents perished in the World Trade Center. I just voted for an amendment by my colleague from New York to honor the members of the intelligence community, but quite frankly, I find it lacking in one aspect. I want to honor the President of the United States, who had the courage to make the call on getting Osama bin Laden. This was not something that was a slam dunk. This is something that could have gone very poorly. And I really want to say that I'm very sorry that my Republican friends on the other side of the aisle never seem to commend the President. You know that if the President had done something wrong, they would have been the first ones to jump in. But I think all Americans, regardless of party, Republicans and Democrats, ought to say to President Barack Obama, thank you, Mr. President, for a job well done. When we thank the intelligence community, and well we should, we also have to thank the President of the United States for making a difficult and courageous call. Thank you, Mr. President.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak on behalf of the Infrastructure, Jobs, and Energy Independence Act, a bill that was introduced by a number of my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion just yesterday to deal with the issue of energy and our ability to make it available to Americans at an affordable and efficient capacity. What it will do is take dollars that we can use by investing the ability to take the resources from the outer continental shelf leases and put those $2 to $3 trillion worth of assets to work by dedicating them to rebuilding our infrastructure, focusing on our ability to find renewable and clean energy resources, and to put those dollars as well towards cleaning up our environment. It's a bipartisan effort that gives an ability to hold down the long-term costs of energy. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to get a hold of this, and I look forward to working with my colleagues in Congress and making this law. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
In the last 24 hours, we heard of the devastating attack in Pakistan and the words of the Taliban saying it's in retaliation for the capture and demise of Osama bin Laden. Earlier this week, I introduced Res 240 to acknowledge all of those who sacrificed their lives to be able to go into battle to find Osama bin Laden. The intelligence community, President Obama, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama directing this very, very, very difficult mission, and as well the brave men and women who participated, and the Navy SEALs who went in and came out alive. But we must realize that we live in a very difficult time, and that time is a time of attack and retaliation. We will not be daunted, and we will stand in place to be able to celebrate those who are brave enough to fight this war on terror.
To
the people of Pakistan, we offer our sympathy. We will continue to work together for the betterment of those who believe in the democratic values. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Address that for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Earlier, the House stood in silence this month when we observe and honor those who serve in our nation's police forces. And I rise today in memory of Eugene Police Officer Chris Kilcullen. Officer Kilcullen died in the line of duty April 22nd, 2011. He was an exemplary member of the Eugene Police Department, served with valor and distinction, received 85 commendations in his 12 years in the department, his service as a member of the traffic enforcement team, and was a skilled negotiator with the crisis negotiation team. He saved lives. Officer Kilcullen loved being a police officer. His memorial service, he was honored by hundreds of uniformed police officers, dozens of elected and public officials. He was remembered by his peers for his exemplary service, kindness, collegiality, endearing good nature, and unmatched rapport with public he served. His tragic death is a sobering reminder of the dangers confronted daily by men and women in law enforcement. One American law enforcement officer is killed in the line of duty every 53 hours. In a final tribute at his service, a last call went out for one Mary 18. Dispatchers referred to Eugene motorcycle officers as Mary units. After there was no response to the call, the faceless dispatcher called out, "All units be advised, one Mary 18 is secure. He may be gone, but he's not forgotten. Rest in peace, Chris. Rest in peace." Christopher Kilcullen is survived by his wife, Christy Kilcullen, daughters Sydney and Katie Ann.
The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Flores of Texas for today and Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I wish to address the House for 1 minute, please.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I wish to add my voice to our colleagues paying tribute to our law enforcement officers around our country. Dozens and dozens and dozens have died in the line of duty, and to them, to their families, to their colleagues, we are eternally grateful. I also want to say that the most important way we can pay tribute to them and to their courage and patriotism is to make sure that they have the backup that they need, that we have enough officers on the street. In far too many communities across this country, the economy has forced cutbacks where they're going out alone, where there isn't the kind of equipment that they need in order to perform their duties. To pay them the tribute that they deserve, we should let no officer out on the streets without proper equipment, without proper attendance with those in order to save lives in the future. I think it's unconscionable that certain accounts are being cut here that put their lives more at risk. That's the reason that the numbers are going up around the country. We've suffered this in Ohio. We know other states are suffering it. And I say to the American people, pay attention to what happens here because it can save lives. God bless our law enforcement officers.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 5th, 2011, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, about a week or so ago, a good friend of mine from Indiana, Rex Early, who's been very active in not only political circles but in civic events for a long, long time, brought to my attention some extraordinary things that has been done by a young man who's in our military. Corporal Sean Leahy graduated from Hamilton Southeastern High School in 2006 in Fishers, Indiana, and he's now a 23-year-old Marine and squad leader in the 1st Platoon Kilo Company. He recently completed his 2nd tour of duty, initially having served with distinction in Iraq. Sean was preparing to leave the Marine Corps to pursue a college degree. And when he was made aware that his unit would be sent to Afghanistan instead of leaving to pursue college, he again decided to answer the call, and he re-enlisted instead of going to college. He didn't have to risk his life again, but he wanted to be with his unit, and he promptly joined his brethren in preparation for their next deployment. He was deployed to Sangin in the Helmand province of Afghanistan, an area where our troops have sustained heavy losses and heavy wounds in recent months. But Leahy and his good friend Matthew Bland served side by side with honor, guiding and protecting their platoon. When called into duty, Corporal Leahy answered the call to action without any hesitation. And I think that's really amazing for a 23-year-old fellow who has a great college career ahead of him to pass that up, to go back with his unit into a combat situation. When he was presented with the opportunity to pursue a calmer life here in the States after completing his tour in Iraq, he instead chose to stand shoulder to shoulder with his fellow Marines. Madam Speaker, this kind of bravery and love for one's country is too often neglected, overshadowed by our chaotic news cycle and conjecture regarding the latest Hollywood gossip. The heroic actions of people like Corporal Leahy can often go unnoticed. But today, I rise to give a heartfelt thank you to Corporal Leahy and the many men and women like him in our armed services who have chosen to risk everything day after day to ensure our country's safety in the face of terror. And I can't, the words I've just spoken don't express enough the sentiment that most of us in America feel toward the people who are defending our freedoms. So I'd like to submit this for the record, and now I'd like to proceed with the rest of my special order.
Without objection, so ordered.
There was an article, Madam Speaker, in a number of our papers around the country after Osama bin Laden was killed. And these articles kind of troubled me, not because we haven't been aggressive in going after Osama bin Laden for 10 years, but because of the message these articles sent possibly to the terrorist leaders around the world. And it indicated that the President wanted to reach out to the Muslim radicals, now that Osama bin Laden has been killed, to say, you know, let's solve this problem and not have any further conflict. Now, that kind of rhetoric may sound good to many people in this country, but it troubles me because it may give the impression that we're trying to appease the terrorists in order to get them to stop their terrible terrorist activities around the world. And so I'd like to put into the record a few things that were said prior to World War II that I would like, if the President were paying attention, to listen to, because there's an old saying, those who don't profit from history are destined to make the same mistakes. I'd like to quote Lord Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of England prior to World War II. And he said this morning, I'm not quoting Lord Chamberlain, he said this morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler, and herein is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again. That was a speech that he made at Heston Airport on the 30th of September 1938. And it was part of the peace in our time approach that the Lord Chamberlain was taking. And he said later on, he says, I stick to the view I have always held that Hitler missed the bus in September 1938. He would have dealt France and ourselves a terrible, perhaps mortal blow then, but the opportunity will not occur. This is a letter that he sent to his wife in December of 1939. So he was trying to say that the reason he signed that agreement with Hitler was because they weren't prepared for war, and so he decided to give the Sudetenland to Hitler without any kind of a conflict. The thing that bothers me about that is what he said to the Czechoslovakian people. And he said, when we were convinced, as we became convinced, that nothing any longer would keep the Sudetenland within the Czechoslovakian state, we urged the Czech government as strongly as we could to agree to the cession of territory, and promptly agreed. The Czech government, because of the pressure that was brought upon them, through the wisdom and courage of President Benes, accepted the advice of the French government and ourselves. It was a hard decision for anyone who loved his country to take, but to accuse us of having, by that advice, betrayed the Czechoslovakian state is simply preposterous. But, in fact, it was a terrible decision that was made by Lord Chamberlain. Because what happened was, because of the appearance of weakness by going to Munich and signing a peace agreement on Hitler's terms, giving the Sudetenland, which was part of the Czechoslovakian Republic, to Hitler, it was the green light because he suspected and felt that the free countries of the world were afraid of him and would back down on in any case that might arise. And as a result, World War II started, and 50 to 60 million people were killed. It's very important that we realize today, as they did after Lord Chamberlain made this terrible mistake, that we should not in any way give the appearance of appeasing the radical Islamists, because they may think because we got rid of Osama bin Laden, we don't have the intestinal fortitude to keep after them, to destroy them, so that they can never be a threat to the free world again. I think it's important that we remember what Winston Churchill, who was an outcast in the British Parliament at the time, what he said for years and years and years. He said, the era, I'm quoting Churchill now, he said, the era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays is coming to its close. In its place, we are entering a period of consequences. He was predicting that World War II was going to start, and this was as far back as 1936. He went on to say later on, people say we ought not to allow ourselves to be drawn into a theoretical antagonism between Nazism and democracy. But the antagonism is here now. It is this very conflict of spiritual and moral ideas. Now, that's what we're facing right now, spiritual and moral ideas of the radicals. It is this very conflict of spiritual and moral ideas which gives the free countries a great part of their strength. And Winston Churchill, who was vilified, was absolutely correct. They should have prepared for war. They should have let Herr Hitler know that there was going to be no giving of any quarter to him, and it might have prevented World War II and maybe saved 40, 50, 60 million lives. Winston Churchill went on to say after the war was about to begin in the House of Commons in 1938, he said, Britain and France have chosen between war and dishonor. They chose dishonor, and now they will have war. And they did have war. Churchill also said, and do not suppose that this is the end. This is only the beginning of the reckoning, and I hope our government realizes that this is not the end of the war with the terrorists. This is still going on. And although bin Laden has been killed, there's still a lot of terrorists out there that believe we're weak and that we're not going to follow through and that they can prevail in the long run. And we need to send a message, like Churchill did prior to what Lord Chamberlain did by going to Munich, that we're going to be tough and we're going to follow through. And I think the President needs to send that message very loud and clear. Instead of reaching out, now that bin Laden's gone, and saying to the terrorist world, now that bin Laden's gone, your leader's gone, we ought to sit down and work this thing out. That is a sign of weakness. And I hope the President, when he makes this speech, makes absolutely clear to the terrorists that we're willing to do whatever it takes to protect America and the free world. As Churchill went on to say, this is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first sip, the first foretaste of a bitter cup which will be preferred to us year by year unless by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor we arise again to take our stand for freedom as in the olden time. And that was in October of 1938. We're in a war against terrorism. It's something that hasn't been seen since the 12th century when the radical Islamists tried to take over Western Europe. A lot of people don't remember that, but they did. And there's always those radicals who want to foist upon the rest of the world their religious beliefs and the way they think the world should be run. And we have to, when they rise up again and again and again, as they will throughout history. I'm sure that there will always be radical Islamists who will want to make sure the rest of the world believes the way they do as far as their religious beliefs are concerned. And whether it's now, or whether it was in the 12th century, or whether it's going to be in the future, the free world has to be resolute of purpose and make absolutely sure that the message is sent loud and clear that we are willing to do whatever it takes to defeat the terrorists. And that means doing whatever it takes to get information from their leaders to make sure that we find the terrorists in whatever hole they've dug themselves in to protect themselves. I'm very happy we got Osama bin Laden. I think it's a great step forward in the quest for peace, but the war is not over. It's going to go on for some time until the terrorists know that there's no possibility of winning. And the threat to our homeland from terrorism, the threat to the free world from terrorism goes on. And I'd like to end, if I could, to say to the President, I know I can't talk to him because he's not here, but if I were talking to the President, I'd say, Mr. President, when you make this speech, allegedly to reach out to the Arab world, make it absolutely clear, Mr. President, that we're going to do whatever it takes to defeat the terrorists as long as it takes. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to identify with the comments of my friend from Indiana. Well said. Great thoughts. We have wonderful friends in this world as a nation, but we need to recognize who are our friends and who are our enemies, and who are the places, the countries, the peoples that intend us harm, who are the peoples that are willing to assist us in encouraging and allowing for freedom to spread around the world. We should be well aware that there are people across our border in Mexico who are not Mexicans, people who would like to see this nation fail as such an important keeper of the peace. We know that Hezbollah has been setting up camp across the U.S. border in Mexico, that they have been working with drug cartels in Mexico, and it appears we see some of the signs of that in the ways that people are murdered, the way the crime business has developed. We know that people coming across our border into this country are a significant percentage, at least, are other than Mexican. OTM, they're classified. So many of them from the Middle East, many who are taught to try to appear as Hispanic and come across and try to avoid indicating anything that would give away the fact that they're coming here not for jobs, but to set up to try to do us harm. So when you are aware that there is so much violence on the border, Americans being murdered down on both sides of the border, we have two lakes between Texas and Mexico, Lake Falcon and Lake Amistad, together about 85 miles of international border that should be patrolled by the United States Coast Guard, but this administration doesn't wish to see Coast Guard there. Visiting with Texas Governor a few weeks ago, he had made clear, please help me, in urging the administration to allocate some Coast Guard resources to these lakes where the drug cartels are bringing dangerous people, bringing drugs, bringing mayhem across into the U.S. Texas is committing money, resources, manpower on the lake, but it's a federal job. And what we've seen with this administration, when a state does too good a job or tries too well to do the job the federal government's not doing in order to protect its state, this administration decides to sue them. We've seen also recently that if there is plenty of evidence to support that people or groups are funding terrorism in the world, and it is radical Islamists that are doing that, then this administration wants to embrace the groups that we have evidence are funding terrorism rather than confront them and stop them. So it's an interesting time we live in, but I do want to follow up on the President's comments. Here Texas has suffered the loss of around 2.3 million acres burned in the last decade or so. Other presidents, other administrations, and even this administration have recognized that when 177,000 acres, 300, 400, 500,000 acres have been destroyed, that is certainly worthy of declaring a disaster area in order to provide federal support. Texas is a donor state. We always put much more into the federal government from Texas than Texas ever gets back. But we're proud to be such an important, vital part of the United States. But it does follow that when there is such a compelling disaster as the wildfires in Texas, 2.3 million acres destroyed, that it would be nice to have the support of the President. But just as this administration snubbed all the contributions that Houston provided to the shuttle program and refused to allow a shuttle to be on display permanently in the NASA Space Center in Houston. Also, Texas was again snubbed there with the 2.3 million acres being burned, snubbed without any assistance or declaration of a federal disaster area. And then we know the President did have a rather nice fundraiser in Austin, during which probably hundreds of thousands of dollars were sucked out of Texas due to the President's fundraising, and then headed to El Paso. And I have to say, much of the President's speech in El Paso was very good. It was unifying, coming from a man who said he was a uniter, not a divider. But then, toward the end of the speech, gloves came off, and things that were said that were not true. The President said, and I know they weren't lies, because a lie requires intent to deceive on the part of the speaker, and I'm sure the President would not ever want to do that, but he did state things that were not true, and they need to be addressed. The President said the fence is basically finished. The fence on our border is basically finished. Actually, our border is nearly 2,000 acres, around 19 miles, around 1,969 miles of border between the United States and Mexico. Close to two-thirds of that are in Texas. We know that the so-called fence was going to be largely consisting of a virtual fence where there was no real fence, but there was technology utilized that would allow monitoring, checking to ensure that the border was protected even without a physical fence there. So not only was there no physical fence, the administration ended that program. No virtual fence, no physical fence. We're open for business for the drug trade, despite the Border Patrol, the limited folks there doing all they can. It is such a massive border. It requires more help than is currently there. We withstood belittling from the President as he stood in El Paso, Texas, where just within a few miles, 3,000 people have been killed in the last year just across our border, the violence spilling over into the United States. And the President chose this time and location to belittle those who say we should secure our border, we should comply with our oath. We have an obligation to provide for the common defense. That includes securing our borders. And the President wants to belittle those of us who say, let's keep our oath. Let's keep faith with the American people by defending them, by defending our sovereignty. This administration, on the other hand, the very administration that makes light of those who say, let's secure our border, let's protect our people, and instead of doing that, say, you know what, Arizona, 30 miles or so of border with Mexico in wilderness area where we don't allow any mechanized vehicle to go. Tell you what, we'll put up a sign, which they did, saying, there's a lot of violent drug smuggling, dangerous people coming in this area. So we would advise American citizens to use the areas north of the interstate because this administration has basically turned over our sovereign soil to foreign, illegal, violent drug smugglers. That should not allow for any smug condescension and belittling of those who are concerned about our security. We were told in the President's speech that since 2004, the President has more than doubled the Border Patrol. Well, the actual fact is that in when President Bush took office, there were about 8,600 Border Patrol, around that number. When Bush left office, there were about 17,500 Border Patrol. So it was President Bush that, and it took us a while to convince President Bush to do it, but President Bush did double the number of Border Patrol on our southern border. And since then, that number, since President Obama's taken office in the last 2.5 years, that's increased 18%. But if you want to know what the President personally feels about what should be done, you could look at his 2011 budget that he proposed, because he actually cuts the number of Border Patrol. Yes, it is true Bush doubled the number of Border Patrol, but the truth is this administration has increased it only a fraction of that and shown its true intent. They just soon cut it. Well, this Congress isn't going to let that happen. The President said we got more people on the border than we'd ever had in history. That's simply not true. I realize that the President has spoken previously of what he says are the 57 states in our country. So perhaps he's not aware of the history that goes back to 1916 when a man named Pancho Villa from Mexico was involved in a handful of Americans being killed. But President Wilson was not going to allow that to build. He wasn't going to allow renegades from Mexico to come illegally into this country and kill Americans. So he took a stand. He sent General Pershing there, and with 10 to 20,000 troops, Pershing went into Mexico chasing after Pancho Villa. The way it was done may not have been well thought out, but the fact is that at one point during that time, in order to protect America from the small number of murders that occurred from illegal Mexicans coming into the United States around 1916, Wilson had over 100,000 troops, early National Guard folks, down on the border to protect our sovereignty. So obviously the President was not aware that any president had ever seen murders by illegal immigrants coming into our southern area as important as President Woodrow Wilson did, but hopefully someone on his staff can do the research that hadn't been done before in the White House and advise the President, hey, there was a president that took it real seriously when Americans were killed along our border. He didn't go to El Paso and make a speech making fun of those who were concerned about our security. He actually sent over 100,000 troops, and they stopped the insanity before it could go any further. Some historians talk about how Pershing was not able to get Pancho Villa and how much it cost. There was a lot of waste in that campaign. Perhaps a lot more were committed than necessary, except he made his point. The violence stopped. And when our enemies who would like to destroy our way of life here take away all the goodness that is developed in this country, take away the things that people, we're told maybe as many as 1.5 of the 6 billion people in the world would like to come to America at some time or other. There's got to be something good going on when that many people would like to come here. But there are those who want to destroy that, take it away, and this President has an obligation and an oath to protect it, and we hope that he'll stop the belittling of those who want him to keep the oath and live up to his true commitments. But since we're dealing with a president who said if you like your insurance you can keep it, and we find out that wasn't true. If you like your doctor you can keep your doctor, and we found out that wasn't true. We're told here recently by the President in another speech just in the last week or so that we are producing more oil right now than any time in our history. And I know he doesn't know, or he wouldn't have said that, but the fact is that we have produced as many as 9.6 million barrels of oil, and right now we're producing 5.5 million barrels of oil in this country. So we also know there's a president who assured us that he would go line by line and scrub that budget, and that's never happened. He told us that Vice President Biden was not going to allow any fraud or waste. We know that wasn't happening. We were told that, well, he said that he was going to close Guantanamo within the year, and I think I'm very grateful that he didn't keep his word on that. He said he was a uniter, not a divider. He would bring people together and I hope and pray that at some point before his 4 years is up, he will actually do that. But there are people that want to destroy this country. We can no longer play around, make fun of each other in this country while people are set about to destroy us. We've got to defend what we've got. And here we had a hearing with in Judiciary where the Attorney General of the United States testified. And we also know that there is a memo. He's been given the date and who provided the memo, and we've asked for a copy of it. Hadn't been willing to provide that either to Pete King or to Judiciary thus far, so we're probably going to have to subpoena it if he doesn't, and we may come to quite a row, governmentally speaking, if they will not provide it. Instead, the Attorney General says, oh, I understand there was an article in the Dallas News where the interim U.S. Attorney down there said that politics didn't play a role in our administration not pursuing the co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation terrorist funding trial. We want the memo. We don't need a newspaper article from the Attorney General. And when we have documentation from the FBI that arose in the Holy Land Foundation in late 2008, we know that in 2005 massive amounts of additional evidence were obtained, and we have these transaction journal vouchers, there's deposit slips, all kinds of things that helped establish with the judge that co-conspirators like ISNA or CARE should be left as named co-conspirators and not eliminated from being named in the pleadings in the Holy Land Foundation trial. We know the evidence is there. We know that there's a case to be made, and yet this administration not only refuses to go after the Islamic Society of North America, often referred to as ISNA, but we have the remarks on the White House's own website, and this was put up March 6, 2011, remarks of Dennis McDonough, Deputy National Security Advisor to the President. Our Deputy National Security Advisor starts his remarks at this Muslim society by thanking you, thank you, Imam Majid, for your very kind introduction and welcome. I know that President Obama was very grateful that you led the prayer at last summer's iftar dinner at the White House. The President of a known co-conspirator of financing terrorism is not only buddies with our Deputy National Security Advisor, he's leading the iftar prayer, which is the ceremony that ends the Ramadan celebration. So the White House had the iftar celebration and had the President of the named co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation leading the prayer in the White House. Who's running this hen house? And then we find out, as we hear in the news, and I know the President gets briefed and is aware, not only are there al-Qaeda involved in going after Gaddafi, we're helping those people, including al-Qaeda. Gaddafi needs to go, but my goodness, intelligent people on foreign affairs know you should never help take out a foreign leader unless you can be assured that the subsequent leader will be better for your country. Whose country are we trying to help here anyway? We know we've got people being killed on our southern border, and instead, because the President said, not Congress, but the UN and Arab League had encouraged us to get involved in Libya, we're going to go expend American treasure and American lives at risk in Libya. that we're going to push for an ally, whether he's a nice guy or not. He was helping keep the peace in the Middle East, Mubarak in Egypt, and we pushed to take him out so that instability is going to reign in the region. Who's running this show? Who are we trying to help? We ought to be helping this country. That's where our oaths have been made, and that's to whom the oaths have been made. Scary stuff here. It is staggering what this administration is doing. There's good information. Andy McCarthy, Patrick Poole have been publishing some good information on what's been going on in the Holy Land Foundation non-prosecution. It's time to defend this country, not be protecting other countries. Now, there has been some excellent things written and said, encouraging the President on what would be appropriate action in the Middle East. Unfortunately, this administration has chosen to play handsy, be friendly with, and encourage, it seems, the development of the relationship between Fatah, the Palestinian Authority leaders in the West Bank, with Hamas, who we've listed and know to be a terrorist organization that is in control of the Gaza Strip. We have laws in this country that prohibit us from providing funds to any nation or any entity who is allied with terrorist organizations. And yet, what we're seeing is this administration apparently being willing to somewhat embrace. I'm hoping the President will come out and make clear he's not going this far, but embrace that, hey, the West Bank joining hands with Hamas, the terrorist organization, is okay, when the fact is our laws prohibit us providing money to Hamas. We've had five defendants convicted in the Holy Land Foundation trial for providing funds, including to Hamas, and yet if this administration does not stop the funding of the Palestinian Authority when it is joined with Hamas, then whoever pushes for that funding may have some criminal sanctions to lie. This is a very, very serious issue, and it needs to be addressed. And Carolyn Glick, that writes for the Jerusalem Post, has an excellent article this week on that very issue, and I hope that Mr. Speaker, you and others will review that, because it makes very clear this administration keeps pushing the Israeli leaders to give away land, make unilateral concessions, when it's not Israel that is acting in terrorist fashion. This administration seems to be ignoring the fact that Hamas is still killing people in Israel, still keep killing people and promoting terrorism in the Middle East. It's time to stop acting as if this nation's administration is okay with terrorism in the Middle East as long as it's by the Muslim Brotherhood, as long as it's by Hamas, Hezbollah. We're helping rearm people who are Israel's enemies. This stuff's got to stop. It is insanity when we help arm people who want to see this nation destroyed. I hope and pray that this President will come to his senses, his advisors will give him better advice, and that we can stop this. we are hurting ourselves when we hurt our friend Israel. It makes no sense. It has to stop. We are going to be fortunate to have the leader of Israel speaking to us from that second-level podium right here on May 24th. And I know the administration is going to be trying, probably has already, to push Benjamin Netanyahu into making concessions. But the fact is, Israel is still under attack. Its enemies are still not willing to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish nation. It is still not willing to stop the pushing of hatred and the teaching of hatred and anti-Semitism in the Middle East. So Israel owes them no unilateral concessions. There should be nothing, and I hope and pray will be nothing in the way of concessions. As I pointed out to Prime Minister Netanyahu, anytime Israel in its long history, going back 3,000 years or so, has given up land to others, it is normally used as a staging area at some point from which to attack Israel. The Tanakh is full of incidents where leaders of Israel have tried to placate terrorists, those who would want to destroy it, and giving them land, giving them things, paying tribute. It has never worked. It will never work. This is no time to do it now. And with that, Madam Speaker, I will yield back.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1,